Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind Movement Health podcast. I'm your host, Kate Boyle. I'm excited today. We have a special guest on the podcast. Emma, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kate. I really appreciate being here.
Well, today we're going to be diving in and chatting about nervous system regulation and also in reference to, performance, recovery, getting the results we want. But before we dive in, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Absolutely. I'm based in New Zealand, so I'm actually a physiotherapist first and trained in New Zealand down south, if you know where Otago is. But I'm now over in the adventure capital of New Zealand and the world, actually, Queenstown. So I have beautiful mountains around me, beautiful fresh air to breathe in, and get to have the joy of working with people all around the world, coaching them. So my physiotherapy background has led me into this work, looking at how we deal with stress from a physiology point of view. And that has been a real game changer, both personally in my work, but also in the 20 years coaching, physioing, and then moving into more breathing physio work in the last, actually 15 plus years. So my passion has been to help people understand why they deal with stress the way they do, help them to create awareness around their patterns, the way that they are showing up in their body, but that then influences their work, their sleep, their relationships, and it's so interconnected. And a lot of it all really comes down to understanding the nervous system and how that drives our operating system that we're in. I'm also a mum, so I'm a mum of two kids, have been a business owner for not quite 20 years, but very early on. So I thrived off good stress. I loved it. It was part of my operating system itself, and it gave me a few warning signs that I wasn't quite listening to. And that's also helped me understand why we need to shift our reaction when we are dealing with stress, because what we're taught, both in our schooling, both in our families and our society, for women particularly, is actually not okay anymore. We need to change this because we're so focused on living this optimal life and having all our doing everything, being everything to everybody. But I'm finding for women particularly that we are not looking at the big picture of the way that we are wired differently.
Yes, well, I totally agree with the majority of everything you've just said there. And I definitely can relate to sort of the business owner and the good stress because, as a business owner, especially at the start, you're wearing so many different hats all the time. And you learn to just thrive and keep going all the time until a lot of the time you have to stop at some point.
Yeah. Absolutely. My journey, though, from that was, I guess, my breaking points were around my pregnancies. So my kids are now around 15 and 12, and I had a condition called hyperemesis gravidarum. And it was a state that my body was in, this dysregulated state, that was the catalyst for me to go, I need to change things. This isn't right. I can't be on the go all the time. I have to find where I am in the mix of this because everybody was getting a piece of me and I wasn't getting anything else. So the condition meant that I had extreme morning sickness. So I would lose 10% of my body weight during that first trimester beyond, constantly vomiting, constantly sick, and medication, doctors, all the things. While this little human was growing beautifully, felt like I was being destroyed from the inside. And it happened on my second pregnancy. So when that second pregnancy came around, I was like, oh no, this has to be different. And I remember being like, it's too late. I have already been running on fumes, and my body was like, you need to learn to slow down. You need to learn to listen in, and we'll teach you now. If you don't listen, we'll tell you again later. And that's been a real big journey throughout that kind of first chapter of my life, particularly in business and not listening and just running on fatigue, running on like waking up and being like, I'm okay, like I'm a little bit tired, and I don't feel rested. Maybe I'm, just a little bit sore kind of everywhere and generally just a bit blah. But I always thought that was my normal because I didn't feel any different from my teenage years where I was playing a high performance sport, running again on adrenaline, push, push, push. And I wasn't shown, it wasn't modeled in my life and my family what it was looking like to both rest and recover and to regulate. I'm from a very big family. We talk fast, we're on the go. My nickname at physio school was Fast Fizz for that reason. And it's been a really big lesson to kind of shift this awareness around, for women particularly, why we need to do it differently. So that awareness in my pregnancies was a real game changer, but it was then in divorce, lovely amicable divorce, I must admit, but that I really understood this reaction from a emotional level. So when we look at stress, to me, I look at it like three buckets that we kind of fill up over time. And those buckets can get smaller and bigger depending on how we look after ourselves and this nervous system. That first bucket being the physiological bucket, so that physical load that we put on ourselves. And usually, depending on what happens in our early life, that can be nice and big, and we can fill it up and we can tip it out as we go through life. But if it still stays filled up, and then it will tip over usually to the other buckets. For me, the emotional bucket really filled up when I was going through my divorce, even though it was my choice and it was amicable. I had young kids. There was so many factors of uncertainty of how do I do this on my own, and this real triggering around this key philosophy that's come up for me, which is, am I safe or am I not safe in my life and where I am as a woman? And that then flowed into my third, I guess, bucket filling experience, when my psychological bucket, but my emotional bucket, and definitely my physical bucket got overloaded when I was essentially about 2019, just before COVID. And it's a crazy story. It's one of the reasons why I've been podcasting myself for the last few years, because I ended up dating a con man, an Australian con man, unfortunately, and that had lied to me from the start. And so as a woman, I realized one of the parts of us that gets missed or ignored is our gut intuition, because we're so busy in this hyper-focus, hyper-drive mode and not listening into this nervous system that is trying to give us its gut information, our heart information, and our brain is overriding it. So there were some red flags, but I actually couldn't find who he was. This is a very short story of that, why that bucket got filled up. And it began to there's a turning point when I found out who he was. And on that day, my nervous system got hijacked like I've never been hijacked before. The day that I found out, the day before, I just invested into his sort of business and structure a significant amount of money. So about 80,000 Australian dollars is the amount that I lost over that time. And when I was driven into that state of shock, my nervous system just didn't know what way was up, which way I was supposed to regulate, even though I've been doing this work for a very long time. And I'm very grateful that I had those tools, because it helped me shift both my mindset in those moments, and it helped me tip out the emotional bucket, and it really helped me come back to the physiological bucket, because I couldn't have got through, and I couldn't be sitting here right now telling the story without feeling reactive if I hadn't. So that psychological bucket filling, I think, is what catches many women out, particularly in menopausal years, perimenopausal years. But it's actually still an accumulation of all those other buckets filling up and the hormone shifts that go along it. So to me, understanding stress first and foremost is a real key player. Knowing what good stress is, what can be how chronic stress impacts us, and how we can get back in control of that and shift that body into safety mode.
Mm. Oh my goodness. Like you just said so much there. And I'm sure so many women listening in can relate to that. And I want to go a little bit back to the start, even just those cues of listening to your body, because I think, as you said, our body does communicate with us, and it can be various different ways, whether or not it's just feeling that you're tired, or you constantly feel like you need to reach for a coffee in the morning, or maybe you feel wired and tired in the evening and you can't sleep. Maybe it's coming up in that you're getting sick all the time, or, potentially you go to the doctor and they're like, oh, you've actually developed an autoimmune condition, or whatever it is. With these sort of early symptoms, how will the body communicate to us?
Well, I think that's it. They're actually warning signs. This is the body speaking right back at those points. When we get to a tipping point status where it's become immune issues or anxiety, those are when we've really not listened for long enough, because we've been driven to override it, which is so common in our Western society particularly, but for women in general. We've had to either keep our mouth shut, is a big part of it. So we have to often say yes when we actually really want to say no. And we don't listen into our body's cues of exhaustion, because we're too busy trying to fit maybe the societal norm of, I must look a certain way, so I must exercise this much, I must starve myself, I mustn't nourish myself. And so there's so many multiple factors that lead us to those points of having the alarm bells going off in our body. But I think what I want people to take away from this conversation is, anytime your body has one of those, it's almost stopping and pausing and creating a little moment of awareness. awareness, that's where the magic is going to happen in our lives. If we can all create awareness around the way that we are thinking, the way that we are feeling, and the way that our body's responding. And it's going to change day to day. This is a practice to listen in. So if we're beginning to slow down and just ask, wait, why would I might be feeling that way? Then we can look at, what does my body need? Does it need more sleep? Does it need to actually sit down and rest or breathe? Does it need to go outside in the sunshine? Does it need a nap? Does it need to break up with the one that I'm with, be actually find a safer relationship? We are often just not pausing to do the listening in. And there's a lot of intuition that our body is holding. And for me, one of the most powerful tools is actually, obviously breathing's a big part of it, but using breathwork then to listen into what our gut would say about that, which feels really woo-woo, but it's actually a big part of like listening in and seeing what the body wants you to know, listening to your heart's reaction, which, because the heart sends 3 times the information up to the head and the head sends down. So again, there's this information there that is asking for us to behave and shift in a certain way. But these top 2 inches, this thinking brain, are parts of us, are often the bits driving us. So for me, when we're dealing with those awareness cues, we can't just sit and wait anymore. We can for a long time, and we can do it to push through. But there needs to be points where you stop and assess, not just for New Year's, not just being like, okay, I'm not going to drink for a month, or I'm going to try and exercise 3 times a week. But why? What is your body wanting you to do? And how do you want to feel? Because that's what's going to create habits and shift the way that your body's responding and your mind is reacting, and how that's influencing your relationships. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer to that one there, but I think it's not as simple as just going that there is a continuum. When we get a symptom or we get an awareness point where the body's like, hello, listen to me, it can begin to do it for a long time that it becomes dull and desensitized. And actually stopping and pausing is the most crucial act there.
Mm. Well, as you said, it's building that connection to that awareness of your body. It's finding that moment to actually listen, and then even if you're not sure what it is trying to communicate, then that's when you can go off to see somebody, and get some help and say, look, this is what I've been feeling, or this is what's been coming up, or, every time I'm interacting with this person, my gut is doing this, what can I do?
Yeah, I think that's a really key point too, is when you begin to notice the reactions of other humans. Because when we look at stress, the biggest stresses are the others in our life, as well as the way that we think and the way that we feel. So if we begin to learn, how do I take control of my reaction in those relationships, that's a really big change in the way that you're going to react to those stressful in situations. And that comes down to our safety response again. So for me, when we look at the nervous system, it's not just around taking a few slow breaths here and there. It's around, why is my body seeing this situation as a threat? And as women, because our physiology is different, we are in a heightened state looking for threat from men. And that seems like it's not that men aren't great. Men are wonderful. There's some beautiful men out there. But biologically, our safety responses, we need to be around other women to feel safe. We need to feel like we have got them looking after us for our stress response to go down. And that's different from just our fight, flight, or freeze. That's what we call tend and befriend. And it was found in the early 2000s. So that's one little wee sort of stress mindset gem that can change the way that you are dealing with it when you go, actually, possibly I'm isolated in relationships, or possibly I'm struggling to deal with the way that I'm reacting in my work relationships. And how am I going to change it? What do I need to then look at regulating my nervous system? And the nervous system is quite a confusing thing to understand, but it's really the operating system in our mind and our body that is working behind the scenes to find our homeostasis, our balancing point. And we need to have a resilient nervous system that can turn the volume up in stress and can turn it down. But then most of us don't know how to do the down, and we can stay stuck on that high volume. And that's when it will tip over, usually with this reaction from our sympathetic state, this one side of our nervous system that is driving our body to get out of danger or to fight, to then move into a space where we can do that reaction. So we're going to flood our organs with things that we need to get out of danger. We shut down things we don't need, like our gut health. It's like not a priority in our stress state. Our sex hormones are not a priority either. So that's when, in times of stress, we can have so many influences in our reproductive hormones, our stress hormones, our immune function, because the stress state has been stuck for a long period of time. So what I want women to know is that you can be a circuit breaker in this. When you learn to create safety in this nervous system, and I would always start at the body first, and that doesn't mean always with the breath, that could be other somatic tools to help the brain and the brain stem and your cranial nerves understand how to come into a place of regulation.
Mm. And for people listening in, if they're like, oh, this is sounding like me, how do I start regulating my nervous system? Where should I begin?
Yep. So first and foremost, for me, it has always been assessing the way that we breathe first. Okay, so it's not about just taking a few breaths, doing some meditation, and sitting in stillness. Why some people will feel good with that, and there is a reason, because it's going to activate this parasympathetic nervous system. My background as a physiotherapist has really led me to understand, and a breathing physio, to understand the patterns that come out with dysfunctional breathing. Now, obviously, we're all breathing if we are listening to this today. So it's not that you aren't doing what you're supposed to do and your body's not operating, it's that it may be not operating as optimally or as efficiently as it should. And that then influences this whole system and can push it to operating in a way that is not going to keep it in this grounded, safe state. And again, if we're not used to doing that, we don't know what that feels like. It can be that this is just what we think normal is, which is why we don't know what we don't know. So for me, when we come back to understanding the way that we are breathing, and there are some 3 simple things that you can do. It's on my website, The Breath Effect, has these little cues for you to assess your breathing pattern. And the first one is, do you breathe through your nose majority of the time, or are you a mouth breather? Now, these are really simple things, and you'll be like, I'm a nose breather. I'm like, great, tick. But many people aren't. And if they're a mouth breather, they're more likely to upper chest breathe, taking that shoulder up high and lifting that chest up, using the backup breathing muscles to recruit. The next thing to check is if you are breathing into the upper chest or more into the belly or into the back. And a lot of times people are doing breathing training or yoga classes or learning to breathe in the first place. It doesn't feel good because they might be told to either take big breaths in, and they're not taught to actually deflate first. And so the rib cage is already in this hyper inflated and breath stacked position. So they stay in this expanded position, and then that pattern itself, I call it an inflated IV posture. It keeps you in this hyper tension between the neck and the shoulders, and is more of an anxious breathing pattern in the first place. So that's kind of one style of breathing pattern. But we also have breathing patterns that link into anger, that link into sadness. And so when someone comes in and sees me, I'm pretty clearly reading them around what their body is telling me and how I want to shift them into a space of joy breathing. That's what I think the way that I teach the breathing tools is about. And the key thing is there's not a one-size-fits-all model with this. And if you've been stuck in a state of stress and overwhelm for a long period, then breathing may not be the best focus for you, because you may have changed your threshold both in your arteries in your neck and in your amygdala, your fear center in your brain, where your CO2 threshold is. And so that's when we'd go to something like a somatic tools, which is more body-based, things like butterfly tapping, crossing your hands over and tapping your collarbones, or orientating with your eyes. There are other ways to create safety to then make it easier to shift into a breathing pattern that's going to create calm. So there's the nose and then the mouth. We want to make sure the nose is the key. We want to focus on actually belly breathing, but actually 360-degree breathing. So most people I work with maybe breathing a little bit in the front, but they may not be breathing into their lower back. And the key thing with this is your major breathing muscle, your diaphragm, is meant to be not just a respiratory muscle. It's for speech, but it's also for stability. So a lot of people that I've worked with years and years ago particularly were showing up for neck pain and back pain because of their poor breathing pattern that was contributing to the diaphragm being in a poor position and not doing the right job. So the key thing with the diaphragm is that it's meant to be activated in the inhale, but not on the exhale. It's just relaxing. And so most people are actually either overdoing these breathing patterns and rhythms and rates by forcing it out. But we want to get people into low, slow, relaxed breathing most of the time, so they turn the volume down in this nervous system. And so the simple acts of that can be actually focusing on lengthening your exhale, which I'm sure you've heard before, Kate, and I'm sure many of your breathing experts you have on here will be saying the exact same thing. And for me, many people, many women that I'm working with, they need to do this pathway before they turn the volume up and might do some of the faster breathing tools. And even the box breathing can be too triggering when they haven't got baseline, calm breathing right first. So for me, the first stepping stone is usually to assess the breathing pattern, which you can do over a Zoom, even on a phone call. I can hear people what they're doing, whether they're holding their breath, whether they're breath stacking, if they're gripping with their vocal cords, and it all tells me that their body has in some way been stuck in an unsafe pattern. So breathing then allows you to shift the dial in it, because the only thing that is both underconscious and unconscious in the body is the way that you breathe. And that's your loop into the autonomic nervous system, which is really driving this freeze, flight, friend and foe, and fight response in the body. And so we want people to be able to see that they can do that. We want good stress. Exercise is good stress. Sex is good stress. Having tough discussions with friends and family, that can be good stress, as long as we then come back and learn to regulate afterwards. So the difference is, for me, I think, is when people are looking at this, is that your pattern may have been stuck there for years. Years and years and years and years. There is some research out of, it's actually from a New Zealand study called the Dunedin study, but it's a global study that showed women and men that had had sexual abuse in their childhood, were more likely to have a breathing pattern disorder in their adult life. And to me, that just was, in many ways, common sense from the conversations I've had with many people when they've been through trauma. So it doesn't have to be actually sexual abuse, but even going through the ACE scores. You heard of the ACE scores? So the
Yes.
adverse, yeah. So the ACE scores is a really important way of measuring things that have happened in people's lives. It doesn't mean that it's a dictator for you of the way that you're going to turn out in your life. However, it does mean that your body has probably been under significant stress in an early phase when your brain and your body is developing. So your buckets may be a little bit smaller and maybe don't tolerate the load in it as much. Doesn't mean you can't change it. And that's the bit that I want people to see, is this nervous system is also pliable. It needs to be worked and trained. And this is a practice of awareness, of retraining, to bring your body back into a calm, safe state.
Mm. And it does take a bit of time, doesn't it? It's not an
Oh,
it's not
yeah.
an instant fix. It's like anything, you are going to have to do practice and regular consistent practice to be able to get to that state.
Yeah, and I think that's because then we go back and be humans and we get triggered, because it's not just a matter of trying to be calm and relaxed when we're sitting still by ourselves. It's like, how can we be calm and connected with other humans when we are out in the world? To me, that's where the magic space sits. And I don't think that's what we probably, as coaches and maybe as and therapists, is where we want people to get to, is where they can regulate and catch themselves in the moment. So that could even be saying, oh, I can feel myself being hijacked. I need some space. Or actually, I'm feeling like this is not feeling, I want to say something, but I want you to slow down so we can talk in a different way. So maybe we'll come back in a few moments. So that all to me comes down to understanding how our physiology drives our body reactions and changes our emotions in a psychological state, which influences our relationships, which are in everything. And to me, that is what life's about, is how we interact with other humans and how do we listen into ourselves to be our best version in that space.
Mm. And we were talking a little bit before about that sort of performance piece, and exercise being, a great way to release stress. It is one of the fantastic ways to do it. But when it comes to especially women, a lot of women like to go hard in their exercise. They do lots of cardio work. They, do their cardio until they're exhausted, and it has to be a long session. What are we looking at, or what should we be looking at changing as women when it comes to exercise and a regulated nervous system?
God, so many things is my answer, Kate. So I'm going to take a moment and just have we pause, because I think the biggest driver is it comes down to why we're doing it as women. So our societal need to either feel or look a certain way. And I think when we shift that around feeling comfortable in our bodies and that what is enough and why are we nourishing ourselves, that's when we're going to begin to change the behaviors behind it. If we're going to understand, why do I have to do the 20-kilometer run? Why do I have to train 2 times a day? Or why do I have to restrict my food, but I'm still going to do this much training? And the big bits for the woman's physiology, there's actually an amazing woman. I'm sure you've heard of Dr. Stacey Sim. I had her on my podcast, the Bravery Academy, a few months back, and she's just such an amazing woman that is a beacon for understanding again why the physiology for exercise women is different. So if anybody is curious around that, I'd almost point them in that direction. But from a breathing and a nervous system point of view, a big part of it is you can't pour from an empty cup. So if your nervous system is already feeling run down or exhausted, and you might be using your watch or your trackers to kind of look at what your biometrics are. If you're not recovering in time after exercise and you're not fueling, you're not listening into what your body needs. And that's when we get, particularly in younger stage for women, we get the reads, the low energy deficiencies. We've not been fueling ourselves enough. And that's when we have this wide range of like that wired and tired piece, because we're just using cortisol so much. And often that's going to change the breathing pattern. So the breathing pattern then becomes this one of usually upper chest, breathing too fast and too frequent, and living off this adrenaline state. And so we kind of like a little bit of it, but then it feels really hard and exhausted. So I often see people at two different spectrums here. I then work with a lot of women that are actually really struggling to get motivation or my movement, to be like, I can't be bothered. I'm just, there's nothing in this tank. Like, how do I move? How do I even get any water in the cup to pour from? And so that's when we've got to try different pathways for women to learn to regulate their nervous system. And that can be around hormones in the first place, because we can't deny that's not a big driver for us as women. So learning to exercise through your cycle is a really important part. And I didn't learn that until my 30s. And I was like, wow, this is such a game changer. Teaching my tween that this is an important part, that different types of your cycle will actually mean that you need to rest more and you need to listen in and slow down. And that sometimes in your cycle, and everyone's gonna be a little bit different, you might be like, oh my gosh, I'm on fire. I can definitely do that harder workout. And then other times my sleep's affected because I'm not getting enough recovery. So I think the bigger question is, how are we learning about our bodies as women, and what is going to be enough to move into a space where we feel that we have given our body this nourishment and nurturing. And that to me is a mindset shift. And it means you have to create safety before you get into the exercise. And then if you are exercising at that higher level, then you work with breathing tools to bring you back down afterwards. You still make sure that you're trying to breathe into that belly, into the sides, and into the back as much as you can. And then when you switch into nose mouth breathing or mouth mouth breathing, you then again come back down the steps and go back to nose mouth and then nose nose. And then you slow the breathing down to help with that recovery, and make sure before you kind of shift gears that you might be taking a few moments just to down regulate between lifting exercises or before you move into the next part of your day, so that your body knows, I'm not going to be in flight mode anymore. I'm allowed to come back down. And for me particularly, if people aren't doing good breathing patterns with exercise and they feel sluggish and tired, that can be one of the drivers for it, because they're not oxygenating their body in the right way. So it's not about over breathing as well. When looking at breathing patterns, it's often people are breathing, it's not that they're breathing getting enough oxygen in, it's that they're breathing too much and too frequent. So we're actually trying to get people to slow their breathing down so that the oxygen can be delivered around to the right areas, including the brain, which is often why we get a lot of brain fog. So to get the mechanism in the body to work right, we actually have to slow the breathing so that our CO2 levels can be reset at a higher level. And again, like you said earlier on, that's not an overnight fix. That is awareness and shifting the pattern and aiming for that 3 to 6 months to notice, when I do these small little wee incremental shifts, how does that shift my energy, my mood, my sleep, and my ability to show up for everybody else in my life. So I think the other thing with that is only taking one thing at a time to change. So, and finding where the lowest hanging fruit is for most people. And honestly, I think a lot of people, just because they don't look at the breathing or look at their pattern, they haven't seen that is the low hanging fruit. And it's often the missing piece to make them feel better, to then perform better as well.
Mm. Well, originally that's what was part of the reason that drew me into Pilates, being a dancer and being that sort of type A personality that was always go, 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 injuring myself all the time. finding Pilates and connecting to the breath and learning how to breathe and how my diaphragm moves. And, that was a game changer. And then, fast forward, I was just saying off air how I've been doing the breathing practitioner course. So I've been practicing my running with nose only breathing,
Ooh, good.
which for the first, I didn't realize how much when I was running that I was breathing through my mouth, especially as you start to get tired. And a few weeks ago, the first time that I did my nose only breathing, I ran a PB, like cut a couple of minutes off straight away. So it's amazing, even when you start to just play around with the breath, when you are moving and exercising, it changed the way I felt in my run. I had definitely had more energy. My gait was definitely better. I just think with the positioning of my posture and my awareness around my breath. So yeah, I think it's a really exciting thing that if you can start to add some of that stuff into your exercise, you can see some different results coming through.
Absolutely. And it's simple things like that, like you said, that change the dial. And then that will flow into if you're performing better, your nose breathing, you're then going to recover better, you're then going to sleep better. So it is awareness and it is effort. And it doesn't have to start like that's an amazing ability to be at nose breathing with running, but it could be nose breathing with walking and then just do a little bit incline up a hill. Start simple and build it in.
For sure. And then, is there any sort of, I guess, myths around the nervous system that people sort of have in the sense that, sometimes people think, if I train harder, then it's only going to be better. Is there anything around that sort of come up in your work from day to day that you'd kind of like to bust?
I think that overtraining is a big one, a part of it. That if I'm training more, then I'm going to get better results. And actually, it's training smarter and looking at what the optimal, I guess, protocol and processes for you isn't going to be the same as everybody. And it changes in our lives and our stages. So the myth for me is knowing that women can keep pushing and keep striving. And actually, we need to learn to slow down. We need to learn to listen in. We need to learn to change our patterns so that we can be there in a different state for everybody else around us. But we need to put an oxygen mask on first. So I think that, and there's some really good research around this, around the like not training, like even beyond 45 minutes sometimes, we're then going to go into cortisol states. So if you are wanting to worried about losing weight and you're trying to do that, well then keep those training sessions shorter, focus on strengthening and getting that body training 2 to 3 times a week, lifting for women. Those are the things that shift the dial. But I think the other one is that it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do breathing practice for hours and hours on end. It can be the conscious moments that change it. And by bringing it into your everyday, that's going to help you recover and stop being that type A. Raise my hand, I'm definitely one of those too. But it's going to help the type A's out here slow down to learn to actually listen to what's driving us and so that we don't burn out at the end. So I think it's the key one is making sure that we are not constantly driving, that we create space and we create rituals is a really beautiful part for one, so that we can lean into this place of what we're meant to do in our feminine energy and stop striving and stop driving.
Which can be hard to do
It's very
sometimes.
hard. Oh my goodness. I'm not saying that I've got it perfect either. There are some days where I've like overdone it. But the awareness is coming back and going, I can change that tomorrow. That doesn't mean that tomorrow has to be that way. Now I need to recover more. I need to do more of this that's going to help me feel better and sleep better.
And I think for me too, diving into the breathwork course and really learning about the science behind it. There is so much science behind it, but it's not, I guess, as you said, when people, I think, often hear breathwork, they do think it's a bit woo-woo kind of thing. But there is, as we were sort of mentioning earlier, there are so many benefits from utilizing the breath, and all those benefits have been researched. It doesn't seem to be talked about a lot, though.
No, well, it doesn't my stuff. Like I've got online courses that have those aspects in there because for me, I come from a physiotherapy first breathing coach background, and there are different styles of breathing patterns out there, and I'm a bit of a mongrel. I blend many of them because I don't think there's a one size fits all. This is what it's about: is about developing a toolbox for all of us as humans that help us deal with stress differently, and there'll be multiple breathing tools in there. So candle breathing is a really simple one to be help people with anxiety, to help people that are dealing with stress or overwhelm, or even when we're moving into learning to slow our breathing down with exercise. And it's very simple. It's imagine you've got a candle about 6 centimeters in front of you and that you're breathing out through pursed lips and doing a really slow exhale with that. And that can be enough to change that moment. But some people also go, I don't want to do that all the time. That's not what I do in a meeting or when I'm working. I'm happy with slow breathing. So it's knowing when the resources are meant to be and when I turn the volume up and when I turn the volume down in these breathing tools. Because some of them also, like the Wim Hof breathing patterns, a lot of men love them because they love their flight, fight, and freeze being activated. But women, we're already activated. We don't need that. We need to down regulate. So for me, finding calm first, calm breathing patterns, that breathing into the belly and the side, long exhales, breathing in for 3, out for 6, pause for 1. That's my go-to. You don't have to overcomplicate it. And then making sure that we are putting it into little snacks through the day to come back and check in with our body. And if we are being hijacked, if one of those buckets is filling up, then we look at why. Then we listen in. Is it something emotionally? Is it something physically? Is it something psychologically? And how can I take control of that? And that's when we begin to move the dial.
Mm. And that's, really empowering. Do you know what I mean? If you can have that awareness and evaluate like that, then you can make really informed decisions and you have taken back that power rather than feeling like you're always in the sort of reacting to things. You can be really proactive about, your relationships or your schedule or whatever it may be.
That's exactly what I want for everybody in the world, but it's not so easy to create because we're so busy doing things in silo. We'll just focus on just the body. I'm going to get fit and strong, and that's going to be enough. I'm like, it's not. We need to nourish the body as well. To be fit and strong and nourished, we need to be able to sleep well. Another part of our well-being will. And we really need to look after this nervous system, which is hidden. It is invisible, but it is working all the time and it is giving you information. And if you're thinking about what 2026 could be this year, it could be the year of you figuring out how I navigate my nervous system regulation. And it is a simple snacks that we've talked about. I think you've talked about this podcast before, getting that sleep early. That will influence the way the nervous system is going to respond the next day and the unconscious breathing pattern that is there. The hormones are going to influence it, the breathing pattern as well. There's so many things. The things that we eat will, our blood sugar levels will also spike it, which will influence our breathing pattern. So we then need to go and look at all the areas that are going to help us shift the dial slowly and steadily so that we become our healthiest, most functional version of ourselves at that time in our lives.
Mm, I agree. And, part of my own journey, going to university and studying nutrition first, then moving through the Pilates course, other courses, going through now breathwork course. And I think some people almost kind of look at me and go, oh, she does lots of different things. But my idea is, as you just said, our health, it's not just one thing. It's great to know about that nutrition and I can work with a client and we can sort out nutrition. But then, that has a flow on effect to their movement. So then if I have expertise and we can work on movement as well and we can bring it together. And so for me, moving to learn about breath work and the nervous system just seemed like a natural progression to be able to help people holistically rather than just trying to look at it at one piece because the body doesn't work like that. The
No.
body, is so intertwined as we've been talking about in this episode. So, I think if listeners are sort of listening in and they haven't explored, breath work and stuff before, I think as you were sort of saying, it's a really low barrier. You can practice it yourself at home. You can just do it for a few minutes. It doesn't cost any money and it can give you really great results.
Absolutely. And I think as long as you can understand how your pattern might be different to start and why you can shift into this joy breathing pattern where it's slow, regulated breathing and come back to that as many times a day, you're then going to feel like that is one thing I can control in my day. And it helps you to shift that dial over the long term to then work on those other parts of the puzzle. And I'm the same, Kate, like I've worn so many hats over my career. And in many ways, it's the lived experiences, it's the conversations with the women and men that I've worked with that have helped me really go, it's not just around one tool. It is around listening into the human that is in front of us, what has happened to them, which has therefore filled up those cups and changed the way they respond. And breathing can be a vehicle for them to create safety to then go to the deeper pieces. And I think that's where the magic can be done. But obviously that can feel really overwhelming and scary. And you may have experienced yourself when you first do breath work. Some people actually feel really overwhelmed with emotions and it feels like, oh, this is too much. And others are like, this just feels calm and great. Like there's not one right way with this. And so again, feeling actually one of my big tools that I get people to work with is compassion practices, because there's a lot of physiology behind that. That to me is the next breathing trend, or the trend like that is people going, oh, I can shift my physiology by changing the way that I respond from my heart-led experience. And there's so much more science around that. And it can change the physiology alongside the breathing. And if we begin to be compassionate both to ourselves and others, particularly as women, that is going to also be something that shifts that resilience and changes the dial and changes the way that we think and respond, which again means we can do the things that we love so much more.
Mm. Well, it's an exciting time, I think, for nervous system regulation and breath work. Like, I know it's kind of been on the rise for a number of years now, but I do really think it is having its kind of moment in the last sort of 5 years, really, as well.
Yeah, agreed. I think there's with more research, which was fabulous. There's more people sharing it, and sometimes that can be overwhelming for people though when they're listening around it to go, well, what's right for me? So I think come back to basics, even just learning how to do the breathing quizzes on my website, that can help people understand where they are on that spectrum. And there is some people that are actually at a hyper vigilant state that they may have been in for a long time, which means they're more into a there's a quiz on my website actually that helps them understand if they need to do more breathing work in a different way, because they may have been stuck in that state for a long period of time. So if they've got hyperventilation syndrome, which is 1 in 10 people have, then they need to do things differently than just your traditional breathing practices or some of the faster breathing that will trigger them. So explore it, be open to it, and look around at what other ways you can shift that pattern, and then look at how it comes into every aspect of your life.
Mm. Now, before we wrap up, I like to ask my guests that if there's one piece of advice that you could give our listeners that after listening to this episode, they could go out and instigate straight away, what would it be?
When you feel any of those buckets filling up, so if you feel a stress reaction from the physical, the emotional, or the psychological, I want you to take a moment and just breathe out the mouth just once and deflate. Most people stay stuck in this freeze state and they can't get them out of that pattern. And obviously, we want nose most of the time, but if you're in a hyperinflated breath stacking pattern, that's going to keep you stuck. So, one exhale out the mouth and then resetting it can be the moment that shifts you from being reactive to in control.
Mm. Love it. Simple, easy to do, and you can do it anywhere.
Yep, absolutely. On the go.
Amazing. Now, where can our listeners reach out, connect with you, find out more about your work as well?
There's a few ways. Instagram is a really easy way of seeing what I do on the Breath Effect. So the Breath Effect is my website as well as Instagram handle. And then the 2 podcasts I have, if you want to learn more about my crazy con man story, there is Conning the Con. We've had over 2.5 million downloads on that podcast, because it really helps people to understand, particularly with having a psychologist on there, how women and men can deal with these really extreme moments of stress and triggers. And then the Bravery Academy is my podcast. We've got 2 seasons of that, which is having men and women from around the world sharing their phenomenal stories. So listening in, getting all the free information, and I've got a lot of amazing resources on my website, The Breath Effect, from the breathing quizzes to the breathing courses. Or join me in Bali on my retreat every year.
Amazing. Well, I'll link that all up in the show notes. So listeners, head across there, connect with Emma, find out more about what she does. But thank you so much for coming on the show, Emma. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you, Kate, for having me.